Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Wallace. I'm advising Main Roads on the Northlink project. Basically, I've been involved in the project since the early project development phase, where I was part of the team working, alongside BG&E and others to develop up the concept design for Northlink. And since we've moved out of that phase and into the more detailed design and construction phase, I've stayed involved in the project, advising Main Roads and helping each of the contractors to take advantage of the work that was done at the earlier phase, and also to try and integrate the efforts over the three different sections of the road. I'll just introduce quickly the overview of what the project is, and then I'll hand it over to Patrick to talk about the specific outcomes that we're starting to see for the first stage of the project that is under construction now. And then I'll wrap up a little bit at the end about the observations that I've seen about the sustainability culture in the team in delivering sustainability. So just a quick overview. A lot of you are from Perth, but for those who are not, the Northlink project sits sort of in the eastern suburbs of Perth. It's being delivered by Main Roads in three different sections. The lower section is an existing part of Tonkin Highway, and at the moment there are several signalised intersections there, which means that it does get quite congested, and the project in that southern part will basically free up the traffic a little bit there, let the freight through quicker and that sort of thing. At the moment, Tonkin Highway stops at Reed Highway. So the remaining two sections of Northlink are a totally new road which will connect that Reed Highway interchange with Mouchet, which is up in the very, very, very northern reaches of Perth. And that's being delivered in two separate sections. The middle section runs past Ellenbrook, and then the upper section runs through various bits of farmland behind Bullsbrook. So at the moment, the traffic is going down from Mouchet. It goes down the Great Northern Highway, which again suffers from congestion, is vulnerable to closures and that sort of thing if there's an accident or if there's a bushfire, and basically putting in Northlink will mean that the freight coming from the northwest or going to the northwest down to Kewdale and so on through Gateway will flow much more freely. The timings, the John Holland team came on board for stage one, so that southern section, the Tonkin Highway upgrade, early last year, early 2016, and will be finished early next year. So if you go out there at the moment, you'll see a whole lot of stuff going on. The middle section, that team started very late last year and working through detailed design phase at the moment. That section will be finished mid-2019, and the northern section, the team has just come on board only about a month ago, starting detailed design, and they will also be finishing mid-2019, so the road will all join up at the same time. Sustainability has been something that Main Roads has been grappling with for a good 10 years, and their current corporate strategy actually includes sustainability as a key plank. They had a sustainability strategy in place. When the ISCA tool came on board, they were very quick to jump on board and get projects signed up to the tool. And Amy worked, I think, on the first one, which was Great Eastern Highway upgrade. Gateway was next, and the Northlink will be another one. Northlink's been the first one to have had the benefit of actually having its early concept design phase happening while the ISCA tool existed, which hopefully means that we'll have an easier run than Amy did that first time around. Yeah, for Main Roads, sustainability is a big part of what they do, and they see that broader advantage to them in trying to do things better. So that's enough of the generalities. I'll now hand over to Patrick to talk about some of the specific initiatives and benefits that we're starting to see in the stage one project.
Thanks, Sophie. Hello, everyone. Like Sophie said, I'm Patrick Eilert. I'm working with John Holland on the Northlink southern section, so the first of those three jobs. I'll just check this clicker. Yep, there's our job there. So It's on an existing carriageway. It's in a very urban setting there, so no shortage of sensitive receptors who have phones and vote. Basically, the roads go from 2 lanes to 3 each way, with capacity for a 4th lane, and then we're going to get rid of those annoying traffic lights that are at Bunara, Morley and Collier, which should free up the road congestion-wise, but also make it a lot safer. Where are we at? We're about halfway through construction, I dare say, thereabouts. In terms of ISCA ratings, we've put in our design rating back at the start of the year. We had a lot of comments back, about 50 odd comments. We've had our verify meeting to run through them, and we've finished compiling our responses. Sorry, so there was someone waving at me back there. I'll try and stay here behind the microphone, but when I'm nervous I tend to move around. So we're getting our comments back together, and they're going to go in shortly. We've taken a fairly optimistic approach and adopted the philosophy that if you don't ask, you don't get. So we've asked for virtually all the points, and we're hopeful that we'll do quite well in the scheme of things. I'm just going to touch on the next few slides some of the good things, some of the good outcomes we've had. They're noteworthy because we think that they're noteworthy by themselves. So whether or not we get an ISCA rating, that's almost a secondary thing. We've got a number of good innovations there, which have led to substantial cost benefits, both capital benefits. Some of the capital benefits we were able to put into the tender price will help us win the job. Some of them we've realised afterwards. And then we've had quite a few cost benefits that'll get payoffs for main roads. Some of them required some additional expenditure, but the business case was there for them to be invested in with the hope of a return. Okay, one of the themes I want to touch on as I go through is about partnering. So I'll try and do that as we go through these slides. And I'm going to hop backwards and forwards a bit because Sophie put these slides together for me, and then I practiced with my wife and she said they're out of order. So we're going to go forward to here. Before I get into the lights, I think one of the first things we did gave us some structure. So as you know, sustainability is all things to everyone, and it's hard to get structure. What we did was we adopted a life cycle assessment approach early on in design. So a life cycle assessment is when you consider all the impacts, environmental impacts of a project side by side, taking into account things like the embodied impacts within products and materials that are supplied and delivered to your site, the processes involved in constructing them, commissioning them, operating, maintaining them, refurbishing them at set intervals, say 40 years for the asphalt, for instance, over the full 100-year design life of the project that was specified here. So when we did that, what fell out the back of that was a couple of real obvious issues for us to tackle. Basically, the life cycle assessment said to us, in terms of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, your lights, hey, the lights are a problem. They're going to be on for 100 years, and there's a lot of them. So do something about them. The other thing it said was your materials, and in particular your asphalt in this job, because this is a freight link. It's got about a foot of solid asphalt right down the carriageway. It said, hey, you suspected it was a big impact. It is. Do something about it also. So I'll just touch on the lights. I'll try not to go into the technicalities too much because I don't really know what I'm talking about. But what we did was we were able to partner with experts both within and beyond John Holland and within and beyond the Main Roads project team to the wider organisations, get some of that social capital going. We went and sat down with the experts, our experts, their experts, and said, we want LEDs, we want renewable, let's do it. And they said, no, and gave us valid reasons actually for them not being used. But in the course of that discussion, they did say things like, what about dimming? What about adaptive lighting? These are technologies that allow you to turn down the bulbs so they don't burn as bright as they need to. And we're able to pick some of them up and run with them. The other one that there's a picture of there is construction lights. We've managed to get away from diesel lighting. In part, technology's got to the point now where you can have a solar-powered lighting column for the same price. Probably next time out it'll be cheaper. So that's just an example of an outcome of discussions. I'm going to go backwards. Right, asphalt's the next one. Asphalt. So we said, wow, there's a foot of asphalt. Do we really need a foot of asphalt? And the design life here says it's got to last for 40 years. Does that mean we're going to change out this foot of asphalt after 40 years and 80 years? That sounds like a huge impact. Again, we got together. This time the suppliers were very involved, so the likes of Borrell and Fulton Hogan. They came to us when we were in the supplier evaluation process and said things like, hey, our asphalt's perpetual. Hey, we've got a product in France that's only 2/3 as thick. Then we took that information, went to Main Roads. It turns out they were sort of having similar conversations in the background, and we were able to foster that appetite for new things to deliver a pilot of a new kind of asphalt on the road. I think it's going to be about an 800 metre section, which is going to use a French, or at least it's got a French name. I think it's got Australian ingredients. EME asphalt, which is about 24% thinner than what was initially tendered. And then we also had quite a few conversations about increasing the recycled content of that asphalt. So we know that elsewhere in Australia and around the world, they use quite a lot of recycled content, or RAP as they called it. That's an old road that's been milled and mixed back into the new recipe. At the moment, we're using 10%, which is as much as the current specification allows. But because of these discussions with Main Roads, with our suppliers, with the likes of ourselves, there is moves afoot to change that specification to allow up to 25% RAP to be used within Western Australia. And we're hopeful, Josh is working away on that, we're hopeful that sometime on our job we can use it. And if not us, then the next job. All right, and then I'm going to go back to this one. So that's an example of applying life cycle assessment to get superior intelligence and then focusing your attention on things that make a difference to your overall footprint. This one here is a bit of a different one. This is a social type issue. This project's got fairly broad support in the community, but this was an example of an issue which could have tripped us up. We had a school on one side of the road and the kids' houses on the other side, and they had an existing underpass which was reasonable, actually. It wasn't bad. But when we put in our new road, it was going to be, the distance to be bridged or underpassed was going to be wider. And so if we went with a traditional solution, they were going to have a very long, dark passageway without great lines of sight, or alternatively, they're going to have to walk much further. And then we detected, Main Roads detected when we were nominated as preferred, that was an issue. And we worked through workshops with the school present to come up with this solution, which is a 3-pin arch. It's really high. It's like a cathedral almost when you get out there and look at it. It's about 6 metres tall. It gives you excellent line of sight through the underpass. It lines up with adjoining road, so a parent could drop a child at one side, watch them go through and in the school gates. It also lets in a lot of natural light, so it's much safer from a SEPTED or crime prevention perspective. It's been a good outcome. There's a few other fringe benefits of this one in that it, whilst it was more expensive initially, they're thinking it's actually easier to build and do the backfill around it, so it may yet turn out to be cost competitive with the alternative. But it's also leaner than a trapezoidal or a square structure in terms of concrete and steel. So that one's been a good outcome that we got by reframing the challenge, if you like, for the engineers. Again, it was experts and the community, those partnerships working together. All right. So a couple of top tips. So this is a mind map, and it's my mind map, so it's a bit scattered. The main things there's some themes coming through: leadership, collaboration, systematic approach. On the leadership, we had a sustainability leadership committee, which was attended by the client and our project leadership, and it's once a month, and it's enabled them to demonstrate that they care regularly, and it's also enabled them to take stock of this information that comes in from partnerships and make better decisions. The collaboration is an important one to note. We went to the wider teams, Main Roads, John Holland, supply chains, but it wasn't all voluntary. There were some contractual drivers there, and I think the importance of that shouldn't be understated. That really needs to be there. And once you have those contractual obligations, you've also got something to govern, so it can drive you along. The systematic approach, decision making, talked about the life cycle assessment, multi-criteria analysis. When it came time to do an initiative, it needed to have a cost-benefit analysis to demonstrate it had a return. Where we went over our tender price, our budgets, we often sat down with the client and said, hey, how about some extra money, or how about we share this? And that worked out quite well as well. The bottom line there, which I think Sophie wanted me to emphasise, was the point there about persistence. That's a requisite if you want to do one of these ratings. You have to ask people more than once, and you have to ask them in basic terms. It's no good talking. I find it's no good talking about sustainability. It's better. You're better off talking about their thing, and just asking things like how, why, what. Why do we even need lights? The cars have got lights. Things that basic, and it generally tends to lead you somewhere fruitful, and you get some good outcomes. So, I'll pass you back to Sophie. Thank you.
Thanks. It's exciting to see how much these guys have achieved, and it's that's only 3 examples. There's actually quite a few others that we could have shared if there was a bit more time. And I think a really important point is that cost-benefit point as well, in terms of that this has ended up with something that makes sense from that perspective, as well as the environmental and social benefits that are coming out of it. One of the things about having been involved in the project since 2014 is that, I've been able to watch the kind of evolution of some of these initiatives. Some of them would have started as seeds, in the minds of those, of the design team way back during the concept phase. And at that time probably wouldn't have had a lot of form to them, or wouldn't have a lot of specific aspects to them. Some of them were cooked up during the tender phase almost, or when I think you put it that Main Roads noticed there was an issue with the school. I think that they noticed it because it was on Channel 7 News. And there was definitely, it was a difficult design problem, because either you had to have the kids walking an extra 200 or 300 metres to school, which many of them probably wouldn't have done, or they were going to have to go through this deep, dark tunnel, which is pretty scary for anybody. So that was a solution where the contractor and Main Roads talked about what a potential solution to that might be, and it was seen that the impact was worthy of investing some additional funding in making sure that social impact was addressed. And then others have come along, later, as John Holland has asked these kind of questions. They've collaborated and talked with different people within Main Roads, different specialists out, suppliers and that kind of thing, just to find out what's possible and what makes sense to do. So, it's been really interesting to kind of see all of that process unfolding. And in watching all of that, I guess there have been probably 3 main points that I was planning to make about culturing sustainability. And when I talk about culturing, I guess it's sort of the concept of, the magic that can happen when you brew up something. You might end up with wine or beer or bread or something, just from adding that little bit of yeast and a bit of trust in a process to come up with something kind of magical at the end of the day. And it starts with some basics. In the early design phase, the team that was doing that concept design, their mindset in terms of going out to stakeholders for engagement was for genuine consultation. They really wanted to get people's local knowledge or specialist knowledge, say from a freight industry group or something, so that they could use that information to feed it in to make a better design. And it was also with the knowledge that Main Roads will rely on those relationships for a long, long time in order for this road to be successful and for construction to go ahead, in a smooth kind of way. So building long-term relationships was something that was thought about by that team way back at the start. And Main Roads, I guess, pushed that along a little bit in terms of setting up my role in helping to hand over to the next phase, including other members of that concept design team as advisors through into the construction phase as well. So having some handover, and also that overarching integration between the 3 sections. So as I said, the first stage is well underway, but the other 2 are just starting up now. So that was the first point, really, just that openness to input and local knowledge to improve the design. The second point that was really obvious from quite early on, when John Holland started to get into their detailed design phase and started to get their heads around the ISCA rating, was the transparency of John Holland in coming to Main Roads, setting up that sustainability leadership meeting that Patrick mentioned, and just putting everything on the table, saying, this is the work we've done, this is how much we haven't done. Sometimes it was, it's a challenge in those early days because there's just so much to do. But in coming in and sort of sharing the good news and sharing any of the problems that were coming up, they were also able to collaborate with, we're talking the project director, project manager from Main Roads, and the project manager and the construction manager from John Holland, all sitting around the table and coming up with solutions. Where there was a little roadblock that was coming up, then, sometimes the John Holland project manager would jump in and say, oh yeah, I'll just talk to someone and get that sorted out. So that transparency actually allowed for the problem to be shared and for the solution to be one that everybody bought into and had a stake in solving. So that was a really, really, clear benefit, and it built a sustainability culture that everybody was able to buy into, I think. And the final point I was going to make was about that ambition. Patrick mentioned just sort of saying, why can't we have these points? Let's go for level 3 and just see what happens. And, let's pull together the information we need. Let's do the work we need to do to achieve these higher levels against some of those ISCA credits. Or let's ask that question again about lighting. We didn't get the answer we wanted the first time around. And, to be able to just go back and ask those basic questions. Because I think when sometimes we'll see teams approach the ISCA rating from a risk-based perspective almost, we know we've got these ones, fairly easily in the bag because of the scope of work that we've got. We know we can get level 1, we know we might be able to get level 2. Quite often they'll say to get level 3 it will cost a little bit more, so maybe we just won't worry about that. So that risk-based approach, I think, keeps people sitting in that space where they're thinking, we just go for incremental improvements. But I think when you go to somebody and you say, well, how might we get level 3? Then I think you start to jump into needing to look for opportunities, and instead of applying your resources to manage your risks, you're applying your resources to manage those opportunities to make something of that. So I think that's that ambition and setting yourself a high target can actually bring people on board and improve the culture as well. And I think, as Patrick said, we don't know yet what ISCA rating we're going to get. We're hoping for a good one, but that's all still coming together, and we don't have an actual result to report yet. But we do have some good initiatives underway, and for me, I think the benefits of having brewed up the culture that has happened on stage 1 is in hearing, perhaps a member of the Main Roads team who at the beginning of this whole process was a little bit cynical about the idea of sustainability, or at least definitely unsure about how to make it happen and what it all meant, to now be sort of saying this is about culture change. This is about getting in there early and talking to the designers, and if you don't get it built into their design at an early stage, then it's not going to happen, and passing that message on to his colleagues in Main Roads. And when you start to see that kind of change in a person's perception about sustainability, then you must be doing something right. So that was all I had to say. My name's Sophie Wallace, and my organisation is called Upthink. I work partly in sustainability and getting sustainability into projects. I also work in the behaviour change space, and also do a little bit of work in aligning sustainability with corporate objectives and that kind of thing. So that's what we're about. But I have had the amazing privilege of talking to all of these people over the past week or two about the type of work that they do, and it's a big panel for a big topic. I'm just hoping that we're able to get some of the amazing insights that I've been hearing from these guys over the last few days. So I'd like to welcome on to the panel, we have Jane Edwards from Fremantle Port. And if you've been looking out the window and you've seen any dolphins out there, that's because Jane's organised the dolphins for us. We've also got Helen Gribb, who we heard from before, from Helen Gribb and Associates, Patrick Eilert from Stage 1, Mary Papachristos from GHD, who works in innovation and stakeholder engagement, Emma Dade from Jacobs, who's a sustainability lead on the Great Northern Highway Mushay to Woburn project, which I guess is the next bit north of where I was talking about, and Melanie Bainbridge from the City of Coburn, and Liz Root from Auckland Transport, all to share some thoughts with us. So what I will do is, for those of you who haven't already presented, I'll get you just to give a brief introduction to who you are and the type of work that you do, and then I'll come back and ask you a few questions. Thanks very much. Mel, if you could kick off.
Hi, Melanie Bainbridge from the City of Coburn. I'm currently the Sustainability Officer at the City of Coburn. Previously, I was the Sustainability Coordinator at City of Fremantle, and previous to that, I spent 6 years at the WA Local Government Association in and around climate change, adaptation policy, environmental policy. So my space really is in trying to work in and with local government around valuing sustainability in everything they do. So I actually hate the word sustainability too. I know we all have to use it because there isn't an alternative, but I like to think about sustainability as just doing things better. And I think for local government, sustainability is a process of continual improvement, so that's what I do.
Hi everyone, I am the Social Sustainability Coordinator for Fremantle Ports, and I work under a really great team which is headed up by a Manager, External Affairs, and we're involved in just community engagement, which involves consultation with community and managing the communications. And part of my role is to develop partnerships with the community that are sustainable and benefit the community.
Hi everyone, it's not quite lunchtime, but as we're moving towards that witching hour, we've got this really interesting panel. My name is Mary Papachristos. I'm from GHD. I'm Senior Stakeholder Engagement Consultant and Innovation Leader for WA. A lot of words, understood, but what does it actually mean? Well, on a day-to-day basis, my job is very, very different. I get the incredible pleasure of working with teams, organisations and clients to look at that really front end of innovation and try and actually put that into that element of design, as well as that whole concept of actually truly engaging with people, whether it be stakeholders, community, and community are our stakeholders and groups. I also get to actually, through this role, have the opportunity to actually look at the lessons learned and take them from lessons learned into lessons remembered. And that's really the difference. And it's actually about making the difference and actually having that change.
So hi, I'm Emma Dade. So I'm here representing the Great Northern Highway Reschedule Ribbon upgrade, which, as Sophie mentioned, is the bit after Northlink, another 200 k's. So that's an integrated project team that I'm representing today, which is Main Roads in collaboration with Jacobs and Arup. And the key thing that we wanted to share and hopefully share some information on was the work that we're doing around the Aboriginal engagement and employment outcomes that we're trying to achieve on the project. And Auntie Bev, who you heard from this morning, she's been a key person that we've been working with, particularly with the Eward people. And yes, I was looking forward to hopefully sharing some things that we've had so far in the project. It's a work in progress. We've got 7 or so construction packages within the whole 200 k's, and 2 are currently in construction. So we've got a while to go, but we've been making some good progress so far that we'd like to share.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Sorry, I forgot that Patrick you already knew Patrick. So what I'd like to do first is I'll ask the panel for a couple of questions, and then we'll open up for questions from the floor. So since the microphone's down that end, I might get Patrick just to tell us, Patrick, what would be a key learning that you've had from working with designers, main roads, specialists, management, multidisciplinary team?
Yeah, I was just chatting to someone earlier on about a contractor's natural instinct to keep things close. Everything's commercial, everything's close. But truly the advantage is in being the best sharer. That seems to be the thing that the client is responding to. They're saying, look at them over there, they're good at sharing. They're learning faster than the rest of them. So it's sort of dealing with that. If you can break through that instinct to keep things close and encourage sharing, that'd be a big thing. Yeah.
Yep, fantastic. I'm battling with my instinct with dislike of straight lines. But anyway. Okay, Emma. working with the community and getting designers to get input from the community is always a challenge. So would there be a key learning that you've had from working with the designers and taking them out to get input from community members?
Yeah, so the approach that we've taken during the design phase of the project is around really trying to get our design team and the engineers actually really engaged in the consultation process, and particularly the Aboriginal consultation process. And we've really tried to get particularly the engineers that are actually working on the potential design solutions to actively engage with the traditional owners and talk to them and actually start to be involved in that negotiation process. So ways that we've been doing that is in actually getting our design engineers to attend their ethnographic consultations that we understand, and actually having them involved in explaining to one of the major stakeholder groups what are we trying to do, why are we trying to do it, and actually be involved in that negotiation on site, particularly when you've got registered sites that are potentially impacted, having those conversations face to face. And I think we've really seen, particularly within our team, the level of cultural awareness amongst our design team has massively increased because of that. A lot of these people in the past haven't had that opportunity to have that one-on-one consultation with Aboriginal people, and they're beginning to understand the importance of some of these culturally significant sites, and actively thinking about how can we minimise or avoid impacts to these. And I've seen that evolution within the team so far of their level of understanding increasing, and I think it's led to a more open communication as well on the project.
Thanks, Emma. And do you think that has led on to it being any easier to work out some ways to get more Aboriginal employment or Aboriginal business involvement in the project as well?
Yeah, so a lot of those initial discussions have now sort of led into these discussions around local employment and local Aboriginal employment, given that we're a regional project within the Wheatbelt region, and quite a long time frame of potentially seven different contracts over quite a number of years. And yeah, those initial discussions brought up those topics of employment opportunities for Aboriginal people, and that's led to a lot of ongoing discussions that we've had with particularly like the Hewitt Working Party and the members of that, and regularly engaging with that group to try and understand what are the employment outcomes, but also engaging with a not-for-profit organisations to undertake a community research project to actually find out what is the local capacity and capability within the region, because we talk a lot about targets for Aboriginal employment on projects. So how do you actually know what is the local capacity and can we meet those targets? And so we've done that initial research within the community to try and find out, well, what is the local capacity? Are there any gaps? And yeah, what is the current level of skill set within the community that we could try and utilise on this project?
Great, thank you very much. So Mary, I'm wondering if you would say that there's a particularly good mindset that you would suggest people take into any kind of stakeholder engagement or community consultation or team consultation process.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. If we go back to what is engagement, and I'm just starting with the basics before I answer the full question. If engagement's actually really about influence and decision making, that is one of the first principles you need to actually take into anything you undertake. If it's not, and if it's about information, it's a communication strategy. So the authenticity is really important as a mindset. If it is communication and it is information, there is nothing wrong with that, but it's actually about being true to what it is you're actually trying to undertake, the scope of the project, and what you believe the element of outcome should be. If it's not about influence and engagement, you need to actually take a different tack. The other thing that I think is really essential and important actually, is actually it's one size does not fit all. It's really important to actually, as we've heard from our speakers today, to ensure that the engagement is reflective of the group that you're actually engaging with. You need to ensure that you do have that transparency and that authenticity, but it's actually really about what's right and how you engage with them. And I think the final thing I'd actually like to say, and that's actually also summing up some what the other speakers have said, is collaboration occurs at the speed of trust. It's actually relationship based. So if groups aren't trusting you, you're not going to get that collaboration as you move through. So and in some instances, you're going to actually have to engage many times. It's like a relationship. You can have instant rapport, or it may take a while. You need to be aware of what actually is occurring and being able to attune and being agile to that.
Fantastic, thank you. And do you think that by thinking about it from a trust perspective, it makes a difference to the way that you look at, I guess, things in the longer term for what's going to come out of that process?
It has to. I think you have to come back to, we've spoken about social capital today, we've talked about partnering, we've talked about collaboration, we've talked about how to measure these and what the impacts are in a sustainable future, and that's what we really are talking about today. It's actually about a sustainable future for everyone. If you look at it about the relationship, the trust, the moving forward, the way we actually are looking to ensure that whatever we actually develop, design, research, implement, build is about that future, then that component of trust is integral to it. I don't believe you can actually achieve things without actually having that commonality and the ability to collaborate, and that's based on trust.
Great, thank you. So Liz, I noticed in your presentation you talked a lot about how at the beginning of the process there was some tension and there was a bit of a dislike for the structured tool that was put in front of the group that you were talking to for the mana whenua, and that in the end the mana whenua really did buy in to the outcome of it. I'm just wondering if you have a top tip for if people are going out and talking to people and they meet some kind of resistance or tension, what would be your top tips around that?
Listen. Actually, that's the main thing. I guess I came into the Mana Whenua Forum thinking I was going to be the good news story. Very naive. And I think really it was my lack of experience and understanding working with Mana Whenua. And so actually to just be there and listen to them and their concerns, take those concerns into consideration and keep listening. It was a very slow, gentle process. It was about building a relationship, creating trust. And now with that trust, we've been able to show, okay, we are taking what you're saying seriously. We're listening to that. We're responding to it. We're addressing that. And here are the results and the outcomes. And so they can really see what we're achieving through the collaboration. And yeah, these kind of key words, collaboration, really fundamental to the work that all of us are trying to do. So they feel collaborated with. It is a collaboration. Yeah.
Great, lovely, thank you. So Helen, I was just wondering if you might have one, or what would be, your takeaway, I guess, message for anyone rolling out an engagement process, given, that there is an adequate process and then there's a value-added process.
Okay, Sophie, the things that come to mind when I'm asked that question is, and similar to my colleagues on the front desk here, a really thorough process of understanding the community and the dynamics in the community and what those connections are, because that tells you from the start where you need to be connected, what the social capital is, and I really liked hearing about where projects happen and they end up with greater social capital because people have got greater connection at the end of it. But I guess, so there's understanding the community, and that's an ongoing process, and that's already been said, so I'd reaffirm that the community changes and you get connections in the community that are serendipitous but might end up causing you to put some attention into that. With Shirley Strickland, it was the emergence of a lobby group, which was, the issues were side to the actual OVA itself, but got hijacked. And it was a great result, because what the lobby group did is encourage more and more people to put in their views via the online surveys that the City of Melville were running. So I saw it as a positive, but the other learning that I have for people undertaking an engagement process is around the activities in the team. I'm generally engaged as an expert to come in and run a ruler over what's happening. And it's not often that I come up with something really smart, because all I do is listen to what people have got to say and tell me about their process and what's gone on. And a lot of the times it's been someone said something in a team meeting, but it just hasn't been listened to as having value. And when someone like me comes along and says, oh, did anyone think about X, Y, Z? Well, it turns out they did, but they weren't listened to or valued in that team meeting. So I guess it gets back to, you know, the connection in the team and taking opportunity to listen to people who've got something to say. It also happens in reference groups, when I've seen situations where the person who's there to represent the environmental knowledge base doesn't get a fair hearing. So that's where someone like me can come in and highlight that to the team and offer them an opportunity to enhance their engagement process and their engagement task by making sure that all the intelligence around the table that you've got around the table to help the project be great is actually gathered, listened to and gathered.
Fantastic, thank you. And yes, Jane, I was thinking you've done corporate social responsibility and outreach programs for Fremantle Port with the community from Fremantle all the way down to Rockingham pretty much for 9 or 10 years now. And I think that gives, a perspective in terms of anyone unsure of the benefits of rolling out a program like that. What kind of top tips or results have you seen from that long-term commitment?
I think one of the most rewarding things about working for the port has been that my manager in particular is really supportive of educational initiatives. So what we've done is we have built some really interesting partnerships from the ground up. One that particularly sticks in my mind is scholarships that we've done for primary and secondary schools. And the first one we did was concentrating on Hillman Primary School, which is from a socio-economic environment that probably, is quite challenging. So we worked with that school. We got a curriculum-based module in place, and that runs from year 5 to year 7. And we tailored that so that when the students go into the feeder school, which is Rockingham Senior High School, that they're equipped to apply for a maritime program through the school. And what we've seen is these wonderful students that we've been able to track from year 5 through to year 12. And one of the highlights has been that one of those students was the captain of the school in 2015. So we can see that we've had a really big impact on that student and the outcomes. And I believe that student is actually looking at a maritime program, going into a maritime field of study.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I love that story. It just kind of, it shows that, with that ongoing engagement, you can make a big difference to, an individual's life or to, elements of the community. So that's fantastic. In rolling this type of thing out, do you find that you ever come up against any internal resistance, I suppose, from people who don't quite see the benefit to Fremantle Ports in this kind of approach?
Sure. The majority of Fremantle Ports people are really, really supportive of our program, our initiatives. But what we focus on is involving our staff in everything that we do. So if we've got a particular program that we're running, and one that I'll mention is work with Clontarf or work with the Kulbadi Centre, which is connected with Murdoch Uni, we involve our staff. We give them an opportunity to mentor students and actually give presentations, and they are able to see firsthand the influence that we're having on young people. And I think that that is really important. And often if somebody isn't quite sure, once they've been involved with the mentoring program or with Maritime Day or with something else that we run, they become really involved and really engaged, and they ask me, you know, when's the next one coming up and can I be involved? So that's how we work with educating not just people outside of the port but also internally.
Great, thank you. Back to Mel, and I'm thinking about the concept of community ownership. I mean, a few people have talked now about trust and the need to kind of hand over some aspects in order to get some good results. What would you say can be the community's role in coming up with innovative solutions or solutions to their own problems?
Yeah, and I guess the first thing I'd say about where local government sits in that continuum is that local government now needs to start to evolve to be able to let go of some of that ownership that it has had in the past, perhaps, around these projects, and say, well, hey, the community are the problem owners, so therefore they need to also be the solution owners. Local governments have traditionally, and state governments too, have traditionally felt themselves to be the solution owners for everything. And as a result, the mindset we've engendered in our communities is that, oh, I've got a problem, local government will fix it. Now, if that continues to happen, local government's actual capacity to continue to fix those problems is obviously diminished. And if our community has an expectation that every community problem will be solved by its government at some level, whether it is local government, which is of course the sphere of government closest to its community, or state or federal government, then community is never going to adopt an innovation mindset around these projects. So while for local government we're involved in infrastructure projects, I guess at that community level, if you look at the volume of infrastructure projects that local governments actually deliver, it's massive. If you actually sort of aggregate all the things we do for our community, right from libraries to aged care facilities to roads to recreation centres for the dockers, you know, if you actually look at all of the things we do in concert, you can see that the asset ownership and liability into the future is becoming very, very large. And if local governments can't then give some of the responsibility for how we plan those assets and how we actually innovate and I guess engender that innovation mindset in our community, taking ownership of those problems, we're going to continue to inherit them from whatever developer comes along and says we want a community garden in our beautiful area, and in 2 years' time hands that back over to local government to look after in perpetuity, as we do inherit all developers' I guess, infrastructural legacies in perpetuity eventually. So for me, I would say that while community at the moment doesn't necessarily see itself as the owners of those solutions, we'd like for them to, and we'd love it if in partnership with the engineers that we work with the consultancies that we work with, that was part of that engagement process, that we build community's capacity, that social capital, if you like, to take ownership of some of those problems and their solutions.
Great, thank you very much. And in listening to all of that, I guess, although we haven't heard all of the detail that we could do, you're starting to get a sense that there's a lot of really good stuff happening. We're hearing words like, you know, ownership, trust, relationships, but also from Helen we were hearing things about, you know, measurement tools and the ability to kind of get in there and see where things might be going slightly off the rails. And we're here at the ISCA conference where we're talking about a tool that is, you know, a very structured tool, which, you know, has a series of I guess, credits that people need to work towards. However, Liz Root's presentation earlier today was saying that they were able to adjust that tool and add in some local elements that made the tool make sense for that project itself. So I guess I'm going to ask one more round of questions before we go out to the floor. And I'm really interested in exploring that topic of what is the role of the kind of, I guess, the magic, the organic stuff that you guys are talking about in terms of the results that you can get versus the role of structure and process. And I'm not sure who would like to start with that. Would you like to start, Mel?
I'll give it a go. Look, we have used various tools in precinct level planning through local government through the years, and I won't rep Coburn here at the moment. I'll just rep local government in general and say that we've applied a great many different tools. Green Star being the predominant one in WA at the moment, I think. One Planet Living has certainly been applied to the White Gum Valley project and to a few others that are coming up around even kinesis tools and those kind of things. So we've actually used them in a variety of different ways, but I'm not sure that what we've actually done is folded in some of that community engagement and social capital building as well as we could do. So I'd say perhaps the role of those tools is to evolve so that we can, and so that we can have some measure of how actively and how well we are engaging our communities in these projects and the kinds of outcomes we're having because of that engagement. Because I think for us in local government, sustainability is often, well, let's say this, how many sustainability managers have you ever heard of in local government? It's not really a role in Western Australia that we have at management level, certainly not at directorial level. So the influence we have as sustainability officers, and often as one sustainability officer in an organisation of several hundred people, the influence we have internally to actually get these tools embedded in our planning and in our infrastructure and in our engineering spaces is quite difficult. It's a very large and onerous process. And I guess for those tools to evolve to make it easier for us to actually implement them across the board, across all of our business units, that would be of huge value to us.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Jane, what do you think about, is it all about gut feel, or is there a need for some metrics and structure?
Oh, absolutely. I think there is definitely a science to how you approach any community engagement program. And at the Port, we use a number of different tools. One of them is our community survey, and we have been very lucky in that has been in place for a number of years. It's certainly been in place since I joined the Port, which was 10 years ago. So we have a lot of data that we can draw on from that survey, and we certainly do in-depth analysis of it each, and that takes place annually. We also look at the census, and the information that the census gives us is things to do with population growth. So for instance, if we were planning an education program, we would look at where new schools are. We would look at, to use the term, nappy valleys, areas where there's a lot of growth and young people. So they're the kinds of schools that we target in our catchment communities. And we also look at diversity, social issues, those kind of things.
Great, thank you. And Helen, when does measurement have a role versus instinct when it comes to stakeholders? And when you're sitting down, shining the bright light in people's eyes on a team, do they respond well to that?
Oh, well, they take a deep breath and try and look happy and think, gee, I wish I'd done that differently, and then I wouldn't have this woman in here telling me I should have done it differently. I've used any number of measurement tools like all of you, and they all have value, and they all have their own biases. But I think the most valuable part of using a measuring tool is the process of getting people around the table with different backgrounds, talking about the tool, finding out the cultural relevance of the tool for this particular community, I think is incredibly valuable. And so the capital that's engendered in not only the tool, but the application of the tool with this intelligent group of people has to be the key. I don't think there's a single solution out there. I think it's going to be a combined solution with a lot of common sense.
Great. And Liz, I was just fascinated and inspired with the ability to incorporate those cultural values into the IS rating tool in your discussion. And I think the ability to morph the tool to really suit the project is a fantastic example to look at. To what extent do you feel that you had, from ISCA, I suppose, the ability, the freedom, the permission to get in there and do that adjustment to the tool?
I guess firstly, Mana Whenua weren't looking for permission from ISCA. And as a project, we were working with Mana Whenua, and so we were very much guided by the evolving conversations that we had with Mana Whenua. And as those conversations were evolving between us, we ended up having evolving conversations with ISCA about that as well. And so I think it was really great that ISCA were very open to the work that we were doing and really interested in the process that we were going through. So yeah, I think we would have gone ahead and made those changes ourselves anyway, and we may have considered those just internally amongst ourselves. What's great is making them part of the official rating tool for our project means that all those contractors that come on board for the future contract packages also have to take that on board in quite a structured way.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Mary, I was thinking about your lessons remembered, and I think lessons learned is something that we do at the end of a project, but the structure or the ability to have that lesson as something that does then inform future projects is always a challenge. Do you have any tips about that?
There are numerous frameworks around which you actually take your lessons learned into a lessons remembered component. And as with everything, you've got transactional and transformational components to it. So, your transactional components are anything from how you embed it into your project design, into your checklist, your kick-off meetings, etc. And this is specifically on projects. And moving all the way through into transformational, which is really about behaviour change. And you spoke earlier about culture and embedding that thinking, that approach in culture, and whether it's a culture of a project or the culture of an organisation. That's where the transformational and moving forward actually happens. Again, there are numerous ways to do it. There's some quick wins and others that take longer time and longevity. And we need to be aware that things, particularly in a cultural area, don't actually happen overnight. I think, for organisational change, unless there's a total revolution, they actually say that it can take on average between 5 to 7 years to see any real cultural impact or change.
Okay, great, thank you. Emma, what kind of tools or structures have you found particularly useful in bringing together, I guess, the things that you've done for your project?
Yeah, so while my most experience with tools is the infrastructure sustainability tool, and I found it has been quite useful, and more so in respect of making sure that we're recording the progress we're making and recording the good stuff that we're doing, because I found a lot of the initiatives and the good stuff that we've been doing so far on Great Northern Highway, it's been doing regardless of the fact that we are utilising the infrastructure sustainability tool, but the tool's been a really useful way to collate all of the good stuff we're doing so that we don't actually forget that we've done it, but also to be able to communicate that back to the rest of the team so that they realise that, we're making some positive changes on this project. So I found that, the tool's been quite good of actually being able to record all of that information, and a really good way to track progress against things. Because I think a lot of the time, all of these good things they happen in the background, and a lot of the time the rest of the team doesn't actually know that some of these initiatives are being progressed. So it's been a really good way of sharing that amongst the team.
Great, that's a really good insight. Finally, Patrick, what do you see as being the role of structure or process versus the role of, letting things develop organically within, I guess, the coalface of, the actual team developing the project?
Yeah, so structure is critical, but I guess there's a sweet spot where you've got a level of regulation, if you like, that guides you and allows some consistency from project to project, but doesn't generate bureaucracy or cramp imagination. And what I'm seeing, I've been over to Sydney recently, and they're short on expertise at the moment, it seems to me anyway, and what's happening is the regulation is going further down because people don't know what they're doing necessarily, and they're just doing things off a check sheet, and they're sort of missing the point, potentially. That's the risk that could occur. So yeah, there is definitely a role for structure, but it needs to be suitably, vague's the wrong word, but it needs to allow imagination and creativity for the groups underneath it.
And would you say sometimes when you're dealing with certain teams that the structure, I guess, gives a little bit of comfort for some people to sort of see, okay, I can see that there's a plan here and I can see what it is that we're trying to work towards. So in some ways the structure gives some people comfort, but you need that flexibility as well.
Yeah, there's a balance there, and it probably depends on, I think someone else said it, there's no one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
You need to apply it to your context.
Yeah.
But the risk is that it comes down too far and it becomes bureaucratic and people lose faith in the process and let it go.
Yeah. Great, okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask if the panel members wouldn't mind, if it's possible to move into a bit of more of a semicircle so the people in the middle can move further back, to turn this into a little bit more of a conversation, because we're going to throw out some questions from the floor now. Thank you. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask the panel members? And just bearing in mind the guidelines that Hayley gave us at the start of the session.
What guidelines?
Oh, about behaving yourself, Ed.
Yeah. All right. Very nice. Helen was talking about IAP2 and talking about how do you get a handle on valuing what's taking place with community engagement and such. And my mind went to the recent standard which IAP2 have put out, and maybe some of you taken a look at that, but one of the 7 drivers which they've got in their standard, one of the 7 drivers is something new in the conversation, if you like, and that is another funny word. Sustainability is a funny word, but this word is complexity, and it is one of the 7 drivers. So they're obviously getting at, they're understanding, hey, we live in a complex world, and a lot of this stuff is very complex with the community and with the projects that are done in the community. And you get to understand that complexity by talking with the community. So I don't know, I just felt that it'd be good if you commented, the panel commented on that. Complexity, adaptive way of going about things, resilience.
Helen or Mary, perhaps? I'd like to start off, but I'm sure my colleagues have good things to add. Certainly, 7 is a really good number, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's attractive when you think, oh yeah, I've got 7 indicators, but when you drill down, there's actually 68 different elements underneath those 7. And so there was plenty of scope to add in things like complex environment in 68 indicators. But I guess the quality standard was developed as part of a pathway for IAP2 leading on to an audit process. So to have an audit process, you've got to have a standard, and that's the quality standard. And I think it reflects we've used the word morph this morning, there's another word, emergence, things that are changing, and the opportunity to sit back and reflect, which is what I do quite a lot of, means that you can look at how have things changed and how do we need to shift to reflect the new environment. So from my perspective, what IAP2 have done, have taken the opportunity of sitting back, looking at their core values, where we move from, what's happening out there in the project world that we need to adapt to, and have included that in their quality standard. That will date, like everything does. So that's my comment.
Just a thought on complexity. This is a scale thing actually that I've observed. When contractors win big contracts, the scale equates to complexity usually, the size of the price tag and the scale relates to complexity, and then they try and apply their stock standard processes, which they've done on their $100 million job, to the complex large scale. That doesn't always work. That's been my observation. So probably an acknowledgement of complexity is probably a good starting point. Not
wanting to re-mention complexity again, but you, Helen, you discussed around the challenges that qualitative data brings, particularly related to stakeholder engagement. So not just you, but other members of the panel. Can you share with us how you interpret and evaluate the qualitative data that comes out of those engagements?
Some of the qualitative data is around how did you feel about that CRG meeting, so it's survey stuff, and but as I think I saw in a recent series on TV, you can write any survey you want to get the result you want. So that's the flaw, and I guess the integrity of the process is really important, and that's where I come in, which is as an independent person who's coming in and looking at running the ruler over the process. To apply some integrity so that you're not continually massaging the results so that your project manager is really happy, but at the end of the day, your stakeholders are really getting very agitated and unhappy. So my doctorate was in qualitative research, but I really do like to get the number stuff as well, which is why I said to you, I'm really envious of the carbon load people. I mean, it's great to have a number and you can beat the number every year or whatever, but in terms of community engagement and people, you can't. And so we use qualitative words like, it was great, or they were satisfied, or they met the requirements. It is a lot harder. And I don't have a solution, but I guess what I'm saying is understand the tools, how you can apply them, be authentic. People know when you're not being authentic, and that's generally something that comes out in a project, that if you're contriving and not being authentic, it will show.
Slightly less in the stakeholder space, but for us in the social outcomes, we're trying to think about how do we measure success for our social outcomes work. And we're actually really fortunate as a part of council to look at evaluation. There's an evaluation unit. They've got some work that they've done previously on much smaller scale projects around social evaluation, and we're having them help support us to develop a framework so that we can better understand the value that we've generated through the social outcomes and procurement. In general, Auckland Transport as a whole is definitely focusing on benefits realisation. There's a lot that we do through procurement. That's our biggest, we spend on procurement. We don't do a lot of things ourselves. We think about them and strategise about them, and then we get everyone else to deliver them for us. So it's trying to look at what benefits are realised through that spend.
Another point on that, sorry, Mary, I guess when I was listening to Auntie Bev, I was thinking she mentioned a number of times about stories. And I think all of us can relate to stories, and they're a great way to communicate things as well. However, in the evaluation space, it can be very difficult to, you can tend to get very quantitative about things, and that isn't quite as easy to communicate. So I think that space about the way that humans interact and that sort of social networks that Helen was talking about is a lot about that bigger story that's very hard to put into numbers.
I was actually just going to add to that very briefly to say value is a complex construct. So what is valuable to one may not necessarily be valuable to the other. So whatever your measures of success are, whatever your measures, whether they be quantitative or qualitative, you really need to actually understand what it is you're trying to what the outcome is and what the shift is. It could be over a period of time. That's why longitudinal studies are always so important. It could be over a period of time. You've actually seen the changes like the Fremantle Ports have with their education outreach programs. It's not necessarily instant, but you need to understand what each of the measures actually mean and the value of each of those to the groups.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Ashley?
The nature of the type of project is to deal with quite often have importance at a state or even a sort of national value. It means you tend to deal with a very large community. Do you think the grading tool would bring benefit if it sort of helps the applicant, contractor in any way, actually specify which community can realistically influence as part of this process?
I think for us, when I was engaging our communications manager in the stakeholder category of ISCA, they were very fearful, might not be quite the right word, but affronted by the suggestion that community, their community, the community we're working in, might be defined by an external party. I think really, I don't know, good luck to anyone trying to define community for the range of projects that are verified by ISCA. I think it really, I'd be very interested if anyone has any suggestions around how that could be unified. I think we have to accept that each project is unique and the community it works in and the impacts it has on that community are unique.
I know there was a question up the back. So come back to you in a minute.
I actually have one question, one comment. Just along the lines of value, how do you deal with the fact that value changes with time? How do you capture that? Because what's valuable today might not be so valuable tomorrow, or some other things might be more valuable depending on the world we live in and how it changes, and trends in general. That's the question. And just comment, I'm kind of intrigued with the title of this session called Non-Environmental Sustainability. I work in the sphere of environmental research and design, and in all the projects that we are involved in, community consultation, stakeholder engagement, and particularly Aboriginal engagement and consultation is critical first step. So, I mean, we didn't say non-government sustainability or non-economic sustainability. I would like to think that that's something that can't be separated, but it should be.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it is, I guess, that holistic side of things, and perhaps our working title has made its way through. But but yeah, I agree. It's like we all sit in the environment, and that cultural aspect is essential to that.
Well, I'll start with the value question and obviously pass it on to my learned colleagues. I agree with you. Value is a changing concept, which is why it's such a complex construct. In saying that, I suppose I liken it to the ability to play three-dimensional chess. It's actually understanding one of the levels, but actually keeping an eye on what's occurring and being able to integrate them and have the agility to move through it and with each of the different groups. Because if you don't, you're never going to actually be able to understand what value means, be able to measure it, and actually be able to actually have those in parts of standards. It's actually about that integration. That's why I liken it to a three-dimensional chess game.
Go back to this gentleman's question, which, as I understand it, was about when you're putting forward a proposal for a project, saying which part of the community you're targeting with the completion of the project. Am I correct in understanding?
Yeah, basically, your contractor, the life rated.
Yeah.
You probably have got a limited influence on certain elements of the community, rather than the bigger picture, essentially, whether it is to sort of recognise that.
Oh, I see. Right. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was, should we have an east-west link, for the benefit of people in the community, but I get what you're saying. I think one of the great benefits of ISCA itself and the ISCA tool is that it gets people to think about a more complex environment. And so apart from looking at the construction detail, but also looking at the impact on the community. So I think it's great that contractors have to think about that when they're putting their proposal together. And certainly my experience in working with a contractor who was putting a proposal together, what the result was of the synergy between my expertise and their expertise was that they enhanced the value of their key performance indicator system by integrating the social stuff into there. So that was very new for them, because theirs was all based around the traditional project indicators of cost, time, whatever. But the social stuff added another layer, and they were able to present that with their proposal to the client, which was received very positively.
Thanks. That's a great note. I think we need to finish on that, don't we?